Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are mapping out what is, without a doubt, one of the absolute most extreme financial turnarounds in recorded history. We're going to trace an incredible, step-by-step chronological journey going from absolute total ruin all the way to a pinnacle of wealth that literally no human being has ever reached before. This is the story of the $30 million trillionaire. Let's dive in. To really understand the end of this story, we actually have to start right at the breaking point. The year is 2008, and Elon Musk had exactly $30 million left to his name. Now, I know, 30 million sounds like a ton of money, right? But in his world, he was literally weeks away from losing absolutely everything. Both of his companies were on the verge of collapsing in the exact same month. Tesla couldn't even make payroll. SpaceX had just failed to reach orbit for the third time in a row. And on a personal level, his marriage was ending, and he was literally sleeping on a friend's couch. Yet somehow, 18 years later, that exact same man became the first trillionaire in human history. So how did this actually happen? Well, to understand that, let's rewind and trace this from the very beginning. Born in 1971 in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk was a kid who just buried himself in books for hours on end. He was so completely absorbed that people around him actually assumed something was wrong with his hearing. By age 12, he had taught himself computer programming, built a simple video game called Blastar, and sold the code to a computing magazine for around $500. That was his very first business. But childhood in Pretoria wasn't easy. He was bullied pretty badly at school, and at one point, he was even hospitalized after an assault. So at 17, largely to avoid mandatory military service under apartheid, he used his mother's citizenship to flee to Canada. He worked odd jobs there, we're talking cleaning out grain silos, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the US to earn degrees in both physics and economics. He even got accepted into a prestigious graduate physics program at Stanford. But he lasted just 2 days before dropping out. He decided that the internet was going to reshape the world way faster than a physics lab ever could. And he wanted to build inside that massive internet shift. So, in 1995, alongside his brother Kimball, Musk founded Zip2. Think of it as an online city guide and business directory aimed at newspapers that were struggling to understand this whole internet thing. It was a brutal grind. They were sleeping employees on office floors and running on almost zero money for years. But you know what? It worked. In 1999, the computer maker Compaq bought Zip2 for over $300 million. Musk's personal stake in that sale earned him roughly $22 million, and he was just 27 years old at the time. Now, most people in that position would take a breath, right? Take a vacation. But Musk took over 10 million of those dollars and poured it straight into a brand new company. That company was X.com, which was a financial services startup built around what was a completely radical idea at the time, that money should move over the internet as easily as an email. X.com eventually merged with a competitor called Confinity, creating a business that would absolutely define online payments worldwide. You've probably heard of it, PayPal. In 2002, eBay acquired PayPal for roughly $1.5 billion. Musk's share from that came out to around $170 million. He was just 30 years old, and he had already built and sold 2 companies that most entrepreneurs would spend a whole lifetime just trying to replicate once. And here is where we see a completely pivotal, totally unexpected choice. Instead of retiring into venture capital or angel investing, which is what almost every single successful founder of that era did, Musk took a huge chunk of that PayPal money and threw it directly into 2 of the absolutely hardest, most punishing industries on planet Earth: rockets and electric cars. In March of 2002, using a massive $100 million of his own fortune, he founded Space Exploration Technologies, better known as SpaceX. Now, to the establishment, the stated mission sounded completely absurd. He wanted to dramatically reduce the cost of spaceflight and, eventually, help make human life on Mars possible. Aerospace veterans looked at this and genuinely considered it a doomed vanity project. I mean, you just didn't build rockets from scratch in the private sector without decades of government infrastructure. Then, 2 years later, in 2004, he made a comparatively tiny $6.5 million investment into a small, struggling electric vehicle startup called Tesla Motors. Now, he wasn't the original founder, but by joining as chairman and largest shareholder, he very quickly became the face, the funder, and the driving force behind its entire direction. For a few years, both of these companies just limped forward on raw ambition and borrowed time. And then, disaster struck, repeatedly. SpaceX's first rocket, the Falcon 1, completely failed on its first launch attempt in 2006. It failed again in 2007. And, unbelievably, it failed a third time in 2008. 3 consecutive failures. They were burning through millions of dollars and a credibility that was already razor-thin to begin with. Meanwhile, Tesla was hemorrhaging cash, trying to get its first car, the Roadster, into production. They were plagued by endless delays, supplier problems, and a broader financial crisis that was crushing the entire auto industry all around them. Which brings us right back to late 2008. Musk had split his remaining personal fortune between the two companies, just trying to keep them alive. He was down to his final $30 million, personally taking out loans just to cover Tesla's payroll. And on top of all that, his marriage to his first wife was collapsing under the incredible strain. He has since described 2018 as, by far, the absolute worst year of his life. At this point, SpaceX had exactly one shot left. A fourth Falcon 1 launch, funded with money Musk literally did not have to lose. And on September 28, 2008, it finally happened. Falcon 1 reached orbit successfully, becoming the very first privately funded, liquid-fueled rocket ever to do so. Just weeks later, NASA awarded SpaceX a contract worth roughly $1.6 billion to fly cargo to the International Space Station. That single contract didn't just save SpaceX. The cash injection it provided allowed Musk to funnel emergency funding straight into Tesla too, keeping both companies alive within the exact same narrow window of time. Musk has actually called it the closest either company ever came to not existing at all. From this moment forward, the story violently shifts from mere survival to just rapid, incredible acceleration. Tesla delivered the Roadster in 2008, proving an electric car could actually be fast and desirable, not just some boring compliance vehicle. The Model S arrived in 2012, and suddenly, a fully electric car outperformed gas-powered luxury sedans, not as a compromise but as a genuinely better product. The Gigafactory opened in 2014, slashing battery production costs at an unprecedented scale. By the mid-2010s, Tesla was the most valuable automaker on Earth. And SpaceX? They followed a very similar arc. In 2015, they landed an orbital-class rocket booster back on Earth, upright, intact, and reusable. This fundamentally rewrote the economics of spaceflight forever, turning single-use, multi-hundred-million-dollar rockets into vehicles that could fly, land, and fly all over again. And Musk just kept expanding outward from there. He founded Neuralink in 2016 to build brain-computer interfaces. He started the Boring Company to dig tunnels and solve urban traffic. He launched Starlink, basically blanketing the globe in broadband from low Earth orbit. Then, in 2022, he made one of the most expensive and highly scrutinized purchases of his entire career, acquiring Twitter for $44 billion, which he later rebranded as X. The deal was messy, controversial, and financially punishing in its early stages, wiping out a significant amount of ad revenue almost immediately. Whether that specific move becomes a long-term success or just a costly detour is still genuinely unresolved. But he didn't stop. In 2023, he founded xAI, an artificial intelligence company built to compete directly with the field's biggest players. And rather than keeping it totally isolated, xAI moved to merge deeply with SpaceX's infrastructure and capital. As we'll see, this combination would prove enormously significant just a few years later. Which brings our story right to the climax. June 12th, 2026. SpaceX completed its initial public offering. It was the largest in history, pricing shares at $135 and raising roughly $75 billion in a single event. The company's valuation soared past $1.7 trillion within its first day of trading. Musk's personal ownership stake, which remember was built from that original $100 million bet 24 years earlier, was suddenly worth an amount no human being had ever possessed at one time in reported history. It was on this exact day that Elon Musk officially became the world's first trillionaire. Just let that sink in for a second. A single human being holding wealth at a scale previously completely unimaginable. To truly grasp this milestone, we have to look at the sheer math of compounding wealth here. It took Musk roughly 18 years, from 2002 to 2020, to build a personal fortune of around $27 billion. Now, that is already an almost unthinkable amount of wealth. But then, it took just 6 more years for that fortune to multiply past $1 trillion, growing more than 50 times over in just a tiny fraction of the time it took to build the original base. You see, as this quote highlights so well, wealth at this scale doesn't move like a savings account. It moves like weather. It's driven by massive market swings, colossal IPOs, and the compounding value of owning large stakes in companies that are still expanding at an extraordinary speed. Absolutely none of it happened along a straight line.
For every headline you saw about rockets landing upright, there were years of failed launches, near bankrupt payrolls, and a man sleeping on a couch with his last $30 million.
And that is the part most retellings of this story tend to skip right past. Not the trillion, the 30 million. The year everything was, by his own account, genuinely close to ending forever. Elon Musk had $30 million left to his name in 2008, and two companies weeks from folding. 18 years later, he became the richest human being who has ever lived. Whatever comes next in this story, how do we understand that massive gap between almost losing everything and having more than anyone in history? Because honestly, that is the part worth understanding first. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.